Everyone, Andrea Woodard here. Ryan, thanks for getting this Zoom going, and hopefully everyone has already been figuring out this new virtual world we live in. Excited to see already 48 people signed on, so we're going to get started. And Allison, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to dive right in, and I'll just quickly do an introduction. Allison is an executive director of the Congressional and Public Affairs Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, focusing on education, labor, and workforce development issues. She's going to give us a presentation and overview of the federal legislation. I know there will likely be a lot of questions. Our plan will be to ask everyone to share those in the chat box for everyone to so that we can kind of moderate that a little bit and keep the extra voices to a minimum. Also feel free, I know both Ryan and I have our inboxes handy, so if you'd like to email either of us, I'll share our emails in the chat box, or you can find them on the partnership website. So feel free to email questions. But Allison, we're really gonna let you take it away, and thank you again for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate everybody taking the time. I hope you're able to be home and safe and healthy during this. I know it's a bit of a crazy time for everyone. Like you said, lots of information to cover, so I'll kind of try to run through everything and then answer questions as they come up. The first, just kind of as a quick overview, the first of the coronavirus basically response bills that went through Congress. Actually, most people don't really talk about it at this point, but it's the phase 1 bill was actually signed into law on March 6th, and it was an $8.3 billion package, mostly focusing on money for vaccine research, supports for state and localities, and small businesses. And there was about $7 billion at that point for disaster loan assistance for small businesses impacted by COVID-19. And then on March 18th, that's when the second bill, the phase 2 bill, was signed into law. And that's the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And that's the bill that really tried to deal with how individuals are being impacted. So there was emergency relief for food assistance programs. That's where the paid leave, both the paid sick leave and the paid family medical leave came in. There were also some expansions to UI at that point, and those will continue to change when we get to phase 3. I will talk about those a little bit because I know that there's been some questions about those programs. And then we finished things off after a bit of drama, both first on the Senate side and then again on the House side. Things kind of finished off with the phase 3 bill on March 27th when that was signed into law, and that's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act. And I suspect we're going to see a phase 4 and maybe even a phase 5, but as Congress has recessed now until the end of April, this $2 trillion bill is kind of what we're working with at the moment. So phase 3, the CARES Act, it made some, it codified and made some codified some changes the Department of Labor made some additional changes to unemployment programs to try to help keep money in people's pockets during this time. And so it extended unemployment benefits by 13 weeks. And it includes a 4-month enhancement of those benefits. So all of those enhancements will end on July 31st. That's in particular, the $600 per worker per week UI money that individuals will get on top of the other benefits the other UI benefits that they'd be getting. And the federal government is picking that up 100%. So individuals who are getting UI for other reasons, even if they've exhausted their benefits, will not be eligible for the kind of unemployment compensation, that $600 per worker per week program. So this is really for folks who are unemployed because of COVID-19 related reasons. And those individuals are going to have to certify that they're unemployed or underemployed because of a diagnosis that they have, or that symptoms that they have and are seeking medical attention for, because a household member has had a COVID-19 diagnosis, or they're caring for a family member who has had a diagnosis, because of school or daycare closures, because of a workplace lockdown or workplace closure, because they've been advised by their health provider that they themselves need to self-quarantine, because were about to start a job, but that job is no longer available because of COVID-19, because they had to quit a job because of COVID-19, or because they are now the breadwinner of a household due to somebody passing away because of COVID-19. Individuals whose workplaces have closed but can telework and aren't being laid off or furloughed, those individuals are not eligible. Additionally, somebody who is receiving paid sick or paid FMLA leave is not eligible. And so all of this kind of backdates to circumstances that could have started as early as January 27th, and they go through the end of the year, so December 31st, 2020. Beyond the UI, the phase 3 bill also included individual, you've probably been reading about this in the news, there are individual direct payments to taxpayers. Those, if you filed your tax returns electronically and you've received your refunds or paid the taxes you've owed through your bank account, you will actually start seeing those automatically deposited into your bank account by mid-April. And that's going to be a $1,200 per person, or $2,400 for somebody who filed jointly, plus $500 per child. However, that individual payment starts phasing out for households that go above $75,000 for an individual, or $150,000 jointly. There are also a couple of other individual relief provisions, including the ability to take up to $100,000 in a loan, or penalty-free distributions from your 401k or IRA accounts, your tax-favored retirement plans. There's also a waiver for the minimum distribution on retirement and IRA plans for all of 2020. Moving on to the kind of business side of things, for all businesses, for all employers actually, right? So for everyone, there are some tax provisions. There's actually a bunch of tax provisions, but the two I will mention in particular is that there's a delay in the payment of the employer payroll taxes between now and January 1st, with the first 50% being due actually on December 31st, 2021, and then the remaining being due on December 31st, 2022. The one caveat to that is that employers who are participating in the payroll protection program, which I will talk about in a minute, those employers are not eligible to defer their payroll taxes. The other employer, all employer tax credit is for employee retention if the employer is needed to close because of COVID-19. And that's a fully refundable 50% tax credit on the employer. Basically, it's the fully refundable part of the employer's share of the payroll taxes, up to $10,000 per employee. Then there's some money that was put aside for to help mid-size and large-size employers. Admittedly, not as much as what the small employers are able to get, but there was $500 billion for loans and loan subsidies. There is a kind of breakdown in that $25 billion of the loan guarantees are for air carriers, air maintenance, and ticket agents. $4 billion is for cargo air carriers. $17 billion was for businesses that provide businesses that are critical to maintaining national security. And then the remaining $454 billion for loans and loan guarantees is for businesses. It's also for states and for municipalities, because there's an expectation that states and local governments are going to have some trouble too. There are restrictions on all of this money, though. Some of that includes stock buybacks, executive compensation, raises for higher paid individuals, that sort of thing. So, like everything else, there are some strings attached to those. That kind of brings us to the small business programs. So there's really two that I'll talk about. There's a couple of others, but the two main ones are this new program, which is the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program. It's a $349 billion lending program modeled off of the SBA 7A program. Now, the eligibility for this goes beyond just small businesses. So it is small businesses as defined by the SBA standards, which is generally up to 500 employees, they're eligible. Additionally, businesses in the accommodation and food services sector, who have fewer than 500 employees at each location would be eligible. 501c3 nonprofits are eligible. Unfortunately, we tried very hard to get 501c6s included in this. We know that on a small chamber front in particular, things are difficult, but unfortunately that didn't happen. We're going to continue pushing for 501c6s to be included in the phase 4 legislation as it develops, but right now this is just for 501c3 nonprofits. And then the payroll protection program also includes sole proprietors, self-employed, and independent contractors. Now, in terms of applying for these loans, these are the loans that are going to go through your local lenders. The local lenders, the SBA has already put out basically a model loan application, what we expect it to look like. It's a 2-page, fairly easy application to fill out. And if your lender is not currently an SBA approved lender, the Treasury and SBA are looking at trying to get other lenders up to speed quickly. So we're expecting that there will be a lot of onboarding for the folks who are not, some quick onboarding for the folks who are not currently SBA lenders. There is no requirement for having no credit elsewhere. There's no credit elsewhere test. There's also no personal guarantee and no collateral required. The big thing is that, well, there's a couple of big things, but from the lender side of it, lenders are going to defer fees, principal, and interest for no less than 6 months and no more than a year. Now, the way the maximum loan gets determined is by looking at 2.5 months of payroll costs, not to exceed $10 million and not to include individuals who are compensated over $100,000 a year. That's including folks who are self-employed. However, it is including, when you are looking at this, when you're calculating this, you are looking, if you yourself hire independent contractors, or those guys are included in that payroll calculation. There is also tip wage. If you're in an industry where there's tip wages, that also will get factored in. And I can share more information on how that's calculated, but the chamber has a really good worksheet on how to do it. So I will make sure that you guys have that. There are some requirements around this loan, right? So this loan is specifically about retaining workers. So the whole idea behind this, right, is instead of having employers for furlough employees, or instead of having employers lay off their employees, this is about making sure that employees stay on payroll, that they can continue to keep their health insurance, and they continue to get paid. So even if your doors are closed, the idea is for you to still be able to stay in business, pay your rent, pay your utilities, and pay your employees. So as you ask your questions about, about some of this, just think about this as that this is about trying to keep employees on the payroll and keep your businesses open, so that as we're able to reemerge from social distancing and quarantine and all of this, that you can get back up to speed quickly and have your employees come back quickly. So the loan is for retaining the workers, maintaining payroll, making mortgage and lease payments, and paying utilities. Now, some of this loan is forgivable. So this is where it gets a little complicated, because I know that the maximum loan is based on 2.5 months of payroll. However, the portion of the loan that you use for payroll, for interest payments on your mortgage, for rent, and for utilities for the 8 weeks after the loan originated, that portion of the loan is forgiven and turns into a grant. There is a caveat: that is only forgiven if you don't decrease your staff, and if you don't reduce salary and wages by more than 25%. If you do decrease staff, or you do reduce wages more than that, then the amount of loan that is forgiven is proportionately decreased. If you've already done some reductions in staff, because I know employers have already started to do that, if you've done reductions in staff, you can avoid having a hit on your forgiveness by bringing those employees back on within, the law says, within 30 days of when the bill was signed into law. So by the end of April, you basically have to have everybody back on staff by the end of April and maintain them through June 30th. Now, assuming that there's still, if your loan is completely used up by the time you're done at the end of the 8 weeks, then the loan is totally forgiven. That said, assuming that there's still part of the loan that's left after that 8 weeks, the rest of that loan is just subject to the normal terms and conditions of the loan that you worked out with your lender. So that's the PPP loan. Then the other big loan program is the SBA's Economic Injury and Disaster Loan. And that you apply for through SBA, right? So the one is through your lender, this one is through through SBA. Now, these loans are available to small businesses, to all nonprofits, so including the 501c6s who have less than 500 employees, to self-employed, to sole proprietors, and to independent contractors. And the loan is for up to $2 million in working capital. It's up to a 30-year term, with interest rates at 2.75% for the nonprofits and at 3.75% for everyone else. Payments of these loans can be deferred a year, and they're going to be made solely based on credit score. Now, for loans that are for less than $200,000, there's no personal guarantee needed, and for loans that are less than $25,000, there's no collateral needed. Again, the inability to obtain credit elsewhere is also being waived. So once you apply for one of these, the EIDL loans, borrowers can get a $10,000 emergency grant within 3 days of application to use that money on things like paid leave and maintaining payroll and increased costs because of supply chain disruption, that sort of thing. There are a lot of questions about whether or not you can have both an EIDL loan and a PPP loan. The answer is yes, you can, as long as you're not using the money for the same thing. If you do have both of these loans, that $10,000 emergency grant then goes to the part of the loan that is refunded, that is forgiven under your PPP loan. If you don't have a PPP loan, and you just are taking the $10,000 emergency grant under an EIDL, that's fine. And even if you don't get approved for the EIDL, but you've already received the $10,000 emergency grant, that's also okay. You don't have to pay that back. That's emergency money that's still yours. In the case of having both loans, and let me just give an example, because like I said, I know this is often when there's a lot of questions. If an employer has an EIDL loan and is using it for COVID-19 related reasons, like, like I said, the increased costs due to supply chain disruption, or because of difficulty repaying other obligations because of revenue loss, that's fine. It's just that has to be documented as that's what the EIDL loan is being used for. And then the PPP loan can be used for paying payroll and rent and that sort of thing. You just wouldn't be able to have both loans paying for rent, let's say, because they're really trying to prevent double dipping here. So that's kind of the summary of the loans. Let me talk quickly about the paid leave side of things. So the paid sick leave and the paid family medical leave, there is mandatory that was created in this phase 2 bill. They go into effect today, April 1st. They go into effect today. All of the leave has to be COVID-19 specific, and all of the provisions expire on December 31st. So this is not about creating permanent mandatory leave. This is all specifically about dealing with COVID-19. Both the paid sick leave and the paid FMLA leave are 100% tax refundable. And because they were initially, when they were created, there were initially concerns about business liquidity, employers can now keep the money that they would have deposited for payroll taxes in anticipation of the refunds in terms of paying for this paid sick leave and paid FMLA. Self-employed individuals are eligible for both the paid sick leave and paid FMLA tax credits, assuming that they would have been eligible for the paid sick leave and paid FMLA leave if they had been employed by another employer. Healthcare providers and emergency responders may elect to not give their employees this paid leave, but they're the only ones. There is another small exception in the case of businesses and employers with fewer than 50 employees. The way that works is a little more specific in that if the employer is going to be jeopardized, their viability is jeopardized by paying this sick leave, which means that they can't meet their expenses and financial obligations. If the absence of a particular employee or employees who are requesting the leave would result in a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities because of that person's skills or knowledge or responsibilities, or if there are not sufficient workers who are able, willing, or qualified to perform the duties of a particular person, and the duties are necessary for the business to continue to operate, that's what DOL means by jeopardizing the viability of the business. And so that will have to be pretty specific. In terms of how the sick leave actually works, the paid sick leave is 10 days of paid leave for full-time employees. For part-time employees, it's going to be calculated as the average of what they would work over a 2-week period. This paid sick leave is in addition to whatever the employer already offers. That includes anything being offered because of state and local requirements. And then there's 2 ways to calculate it. If the employee is taking leave because of a government quarantine, because the doctor has told them they needed to self-quarantine, or because they're experiencing COVID-19 related symptoms and are seeking a medical diagnosis, they get compensated at their regular rate. If they are taking the sick leave to care for somebody else who's under quarantine, because they're taking care of children whose school is closed or childcare facilities are closed, or if they're experiencing symptoms but not actually seeking medical diagnosis, those individuals get compensated at 2/3 their regular rate. Now, once those 10 days of paid leave are exhausted, that's when the FMLA leave comes in. The FMLA leave is 10 weeks of paid leave for employees who have been with the employer for more than 30 days and who are staying out of the workforce, who are staying home, taking the leave to care for a child because schools are closed or daycare is closed. The FMLA leave does not apply for any other reason except for that reason. If the individual is able to telework, however, then that's not FMLA leave, they're teleworking. And those individuals, after taking 10 days of unpaid or paid leave, those individuals then are being compensated at 2/3 of their regular rate. Okay, so that is a lot of information, and I know I went through it pretty quickly. So why don't we try to answer some questions, because I'm sure there are some.
Thanks, Allison. Yes, we've got a couple already, and just to give you a little bit of a break, I'll kind of moderate and also reading the questions out loud so that we make sure anyone who's just on the phone hears those as well. So the first question is kind of a clarification. If you do get the Payment Protection Program loan, are you not eligible for the FFRC?
What is the FFRC?
Or is that the, maybe Grant, if you can clarify in the chat box what you meant by the FFRC, we'll hop on to the next one.
I think, no, oh wait, I don't know what FFRC is. I'm sorry.
We'll come back to it.
Okay.
So from Randy, we have, certainly there's a lot of information out there that conflicts. We recently received a note from a labor law firm that supports our industry, indicating that if we had employees laid off already and were shut down, we could still be eligible for a PPP loan in May or early June, but not originating the loan until such time that we are bringing folks back. Can you talk about that a little bit, Allison? Does that make sense? And I will, really quick before you jump in, I'm going to let everyone know too, if there are questions that we need to follow up with, we'll make sure to grab folks' contact information through this so that we can get any questions answered after the fact. So sorry about that. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the requirement is that you actually have to have the employees back to work by the end of April. It specifically says that in the law, that employees need to be brought back on board within 30 days of enactment of the bill.
Thank you.
So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. Is the, did have someone mention, is the Family First Care Act was the FFRC reference. So kind of getting back to, if you get the PPP loan, are you not eligible for the Family First Cares Act?
Oh no, they're totally separate. So so the phase 2, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that sets up the paid leave requirements. So as long as you have less than 500 employees, you have to provide the paid sick leave and the paid FMLA leave. Now, you can use money from the PPP to pay that, because those are considered payroll costs. So they do interact, but one doesn't cancel the other out. If I didn't answer that question correctly, if that's not what was meant, just follow up.
Let us know, Grant. Thank you, Allison. So next question is, what if the employees you already let go and try to bring back do not want to return? Is that held against you when applying for the PPP?
So if the employee, so basically the retention is calculated from the date of origination. So it gets all kind of complicated in that it could, because you'll have to say how many employees you've got while you're working on this, right? And depending on what your business is, whether it's a seasonal business and all of that, it's calculated differently. However, it is important to note when you're having these conversations with your employees that if they do not come back and you've offered them the opportunity to come back, they are not eligible for unemployment because you have given them the opportunity to have a job and they have turned it down. So they don't fit, right? Like, because we've gotten this question a couple of times that it's possible that under the unemployment program, especially with the $600 compensation, that they might be making more money than what they would be making if they came back to work with you. But you have to remember that they are unemployed or underemployed because they can't have the jobs. If you offer to pull them off of furlough and they say, well, no thanks, I want to stay on unemployment, that's all well and good, except they can't actually stay on unemployment.
Thank you. So the next question here is, if an employer elects not to exempt healthcare providers as eligible employees under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and pays the required sick or family leave, is the employer eligible for the related credit?
Yes.
Easy.
That was easy. It's that those employers may exclude their employees. The reason for it, right, is that we want to make sure that healthcare personnel are available at this time of need. So if the employer feels that they can't staff because somebody's taking sick leave or FMLA on their own, it's to get around that.
Thank you. Can you, Allison, confirm the date of origination of the PPP loan? I'm thinking this is wondering when they can apply now, and then it's 30 days from now, correct? That they'd have to bring people back, or is that, am I off on that?
No, so our understanding is that they're going to try to move very quickly from the time you apply to the time that you actually get your loan. There's rumors that within a day or two, like we're talking, things are going to move very fast. We'll know more as to what that timeline actually looks like on Friday. However, when they're talking about this in terms of not having a reduction in workforce, if you're hiring people back, they still have to be back before the end of April, even if your loan doesn't originate till May 3rd.
Thank you. Are there other questions that anyone wants to add into the chat box? We do have Allison until 2 Central Time here, but we can also, like I said, take questions after the fact and get some answers and email those if anyone is interested.
And I will send this here. I'll put this in the chat feature. I will send this to you guys so you have it separately, but just for a quick look at kind of how to calculate everything. This is I think I just put it to Kylie. I'm sorry. Let me put it to everybody. Here we go. It's a quick guide as to how to calculate payroll and all of that, and tipped wages and everything when looking at the PPP, but we'll make sure you have all the other stuff too. So
thanks, Allison, and we'll make sure to share that link as well. It looks like we do have another question or two. Next question is, for businesses under 50, it looks like there are some exemptions possible for the 2 weeks paid leave or 10 weeks FMLA paid leave. Do we know how employers can apply for that exemption?
Yep. So it's not really an application in that way. You're going to be required to keep the documentation, and the 3 ways that basically the exemption is specifically if providing that paid leave would jeopardize the business's viability, and that's the language that's used in the law. So DOL guidance says that jeopardizing viability means paying the sick leave or FMLA leave would result in expenses and financial obligations exceeding available business revenue and cause the business to cease operating at a minimal capacity. that it means the absence of an employee or employees requesting the paid sick or FMLA leave would result in a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the business because of that employee's specialized skills, knowledge, or responsibilities, or that there are not a sufficient number of workers who are able, willing, and qualified and to perform the duties of the employee who is taking the paid sick or FMLA leave, and that those duties are essential for the business to operate at minimal capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question is, one of the questions on the PPP application was a certification of FTE equivalence. How do we include part-time employees in that?
I don't know. I do know the answer to that. Wait, including part-time employees was about looking back. Shoot, I don't remember how long. And it's taking an average. It's taking an average of how long they work. I need to get back to you on that. I don't remember off the top of my head.
That is no problem. Grant, we'll make sure to follow up with you on that question specifically. So the next question for the group, for Allison, but from the group is, with regard to rehiring employees for loan forgivenesses under the PPP, it was my understanding that the deadline to rehire is June 30th, 2020. And kind of quoting here, if you reduce the salary or wages of your employees between February 15th, 2020 and 30 days after the enactment of the CARES Act, April 27th, as compared to their salaries or wages on February 15th, 2020, you may restore their compensation before June 30th and thereby avoid application of the reduction to the amount of your loan forgiveness by reason of a reduction in salary or wages during the covered period. You address that.
Right. So the date of enactment of the law was actually March 27th, not April 27th. So you have to have, our understanding is you have to have everybody rehired and back by, like, again, this comes back to trying to remember what the purpose of this law is. The purpose of this law is to keep everybody on payroll and to keep the businesses open through June 30th. So if you've done a reduction in staff or if you've reduced salaries, you need to bring them back on board, and you can't have a reduction or can't have a reduction in workforce or in salary between the loan origination and June 30th. If you want the loan forgiven, right? You can still get the loan. Like, this is the other important thing. You can still get the loan. And this is simply talking about loan forgiveness. So it may mean that if this is the concern, maybe PPP isn't the way to go for you. Maybe the EIDL loan is the way to go for you, where you get that $10,000 of emergency money, that's a $10,000 grant, and you don't have necessarily those other restrictions about keeping people on staff. So the loans are actually different and do interact differently.
Thank you. And Naomi, we can follow up with you separately too, just to make sure that that is all clear. And if we need to talk through that a little bit more, we can. The next question, Allison, is if the business is shut down and employees are on furlough prior to April 1st, so before today, do I still have time to pay the 10 days of sick leave before they can draw unemployment?
If they are furloughed, then no, you don't have to pay them. Then they can just draw the unemployment if they are furloughed. If the business is closed and you are still paying them, then, and they decide in that pay period, like in that part of that paying them, that they also want to take paid sick time, then you would have to pay them the paid sick time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Shannon, I know you have a question about guidance and definitions. So Ryan and I will follow up separately with you on that to make sure that you have the information you need for your employer. quick clarification question. The PPP salary and wages portion is only applicable to FTE's salary and wages currently, correct?
No, I thought that it's, oh wait, let me, I can double check that real fast.
Okay.
Payroll.
Mm-hmm.
So payroll, all right, the payroll costs include any salary, wage, commission, cash and tip equivalents, vacation and parental, family, medical, sick leave. It includes group healthcare benefits, including insurance premiums, retirement benefits. I think when you're calculating, I think it's when you're calculating full-time equivalents is when you are calculating the forgiveness, but I'm not sure about the payroll costs itself.
We will follow up with you, Jeff, and make sure we get that question answered. Yeah. Okay, so we've got another question here. What proof is needed from employees that have to take leave for childcare, or if they have an underlying health issue that keeps them from working? Also curious about this, they're curious about it for future record keeping as well.
Yeah, I mean, there does actually need to be, and this is where things get a little tricky, but the Department of Labor is saying that there does actually need to be certification. We're still waiting for exactly what that guidance looks like as to what that certification is, but they are saying you're going to need that. So in some cases, for example, employers are actually asking for doctor's notes in terms of diagnoses.
So just to clarify, Allison, part-time employees should be included in the employee count on the PPP.
Part-time employees are calculated in the payroll when you're looking at your payroll costs.
Okay.
When you're looking at the employee count, you mean as if you have fewer than 500 employees. Is that?
Grant, can you respond there to clarify what the question? Payroll count.
When you're looking at the payroll costs, then I believe you are supposed to include part-time employees. However, when you're looking at what is being when you're looking at your loan forgiveness and your when you're looking at that side of it, it's then just full-time employees. Part of it is because remember that they don't match up quite the same way. You're looking at payroll costs, so you can be looking at your whole amount of the loan, but the forgiveness is only going to be for the first 8 weeks of that loan. Now that might be the entirety of the loan, but it might not be.
Thank you. So the next question here is, Allison, you mentioned being able to add a contractor to payroll for the PPP calculation. Does it need to be an individual contractor, or can it be another business you contract with to provide a service, delivery of your product, for example?
No, it's just an independent contractor, not the, yeah, not a,
individual.
It's not the cleaning crew, but it's the, computer guy who comes in to help, once a week or whatever.
Thank you. And another question here, EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan, excuse me, there's too many acronyms here. The EIDL loans also apply to 501c3 nonprofits, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I guess that was a message that was just sent to me. Are there other questions that folks would like to toss out there at this time? We'll give it just a minute before we wrap up. And like I said before, we will follow up with the 4 folks we mentioned before. We will be happy to connect with Allison separately to answer any clarifying questions, any questions at all that anyone wants to send separately. And with that, I'm just going to end with a couple of comments. So Allison, thank you. Really, really appreciate it. Just so you know, the U.S. Chamber has been excellent in terms of the resources and the guides, and we've really been relying on them a lot. So we're grateful for that. And please pass that along to all of your colleagues. We appreciate it.
I will, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Just encourage everyone to, we are keeping as much information as we can at dsmpartnership.com/COVID/19. And we have a page on public policy. There's a whole list of resources on small business support and a lot of links to take you to all of these places that have been, many of the places that have been mentioned on the call. We're hosting virtual events, and like I said, always happy to respond to emails. Don't hesitate to bug us again if you need to reach us. It's I know everyone's working virtually, and that means probably more emails than you had before this all happened. So lastly, just we'll mention one more time, we have recorded this and we'll share it. Those who were registered will make sure to share the link as to where that's at. If for some reason you were using another person's Zoom link, we can check with them or check with Ryan and I, and we'll make sure to get you that, as well as the link that Allison shared in the chat earlier. So with that, just one more round of thanks to Allison, and thanks to all of you for joining. Ryan, thanks for doing all the coordination on this Zoom today, and we'll look forward to talking to everyone soon.